Over the last few seasons, Manchester United have quickly established themselves as one of the best defences in the world. In this video, I'll take a look at some of the factors behind that, including the prudent recruitment of defensive players, the development of talented young defenders, and Marc Skinner's tactical setup. Let's dive into it. So let's start by taking a look at the data. So I want to begin with the 23-24 season, because in this campaign, United's defence was particularly poor, and the data shows this. Goals conceded in the 23-24 campaign was 32. This ranked them 5th in the league, behind even Liverpool and of course the other top 4 sides. Then without the big 4 considered, so in their games against opponents who should be weaker than Manchester United, they still conceded 12 goals, which saw them ranked 5th, again behind Liverpool and the big 3. And then for clean sheets, they were joint 3rd, owing to no small part to Mary Earps, who was phenomenal throughout that season. But United's defence wasn't great, only 7 clean sheets in that campaign. Now, if we fast forward to 24-25, we can see a major shift. Only 16 goals conceded. That is half of what they conceded in the 23-24 season. This saw them ranked 2nd in the league last season. Only Chelsea conceded less goals. And if you don't consider the sides in the big 4, United were incredible. Only 5 goals conceded against the rest of the league. This saw them ranked top of that, 0.31 per 90. So on average, they'd only score a third of a goal per 90, which is very impressive. Then if you look at clean sheets, they ranked joint 1st for that, with Fallon Tullis-Joyce picking up 13. That was joint with Hannah Hampton. So as you can see, United last season taking a huge step up in terms of quality of defence. Now if we move into this season, really impressive start to the campaign. Only 1 goal conceded from the first 3 matches, season ranked 1st, and 2 clean sheets, which from 3 possible games is a very good start, and this joint top with Tottenham and Lisa Kopp, which was a big surprise. And obviously 25-26 is a very small data set, and as throughout the season we may learn something different, but what we can see so far is a very gradual increase as United have quickly become one of the best defences in the league. So what has changed over this 2-year period? Well, I want to start by taking a look at the personnel for Manchester United, because there have been some really good additions and changes to roles that have seen their defence become a lot better. So let's start by looking at the personnel. Now this is the defence from the game against Arsenal, the 2-2 draw back in 2023, and I think this is representative really of what their side was for most of the season. Now if we take a look at how they've improved then over that time period, we can start to see some of the players. So obviously Mary Earps left. There was a lot of concern that Earps leaving would be very bad for Manchester United, but in came Tullis-Joyce, who's arguably been a better goalkeeper for United in that period. She kept more clean sheets last season, and obviously you can make an argument of whether it was Tullis-Joyce doing better or whether it was Earps, whether the defence was just better, but either way, she kept a lot more clean sheets, looked a lot more confident in that goal, and had a real huge impact on how good United were last season. Some of the other changes we saw were the addition of Dominique Janssen, who came in obviously as a fantastic centre-back, but we saw her used as a defensive midfielder last season. Obviously, with Katie Zellum departing, she slotted quite nicely into that role. Some other things that we saw from last season was Jade Riviere coming into the side. She obviously missed a lot of the previous campaign through injury, but she was phenomenal last campaign. Obviously, with Blundell out with pregnancy, she slotted in fairly seamlessly. We also saw Gemma Evans, who was suspect in 2023. We saw her depart, and we saw the return of Gabby George from injury. And again, George had a really strong last campaign. And this is one of the other things. It wasn't just the recruitment. So obviously touching on Tullis-Joyce and Janssen, how important they've been. Tullis-Joyce obviously signed the summer before, but only became a starter in 2024. Janssen signed in the summer of 2024. Incredible additions, but it was also how players have stepped up. So Jade Riviere was an excellent defender, but was inconsistent, obviously a little bit injury prone as well. But what we saw was she stepped up across the board. She became much more reliable, and she was more available throughout last season. I think we saw her step up in both her defensive game and her attacking game, to the point where now she's one of the top right backs in the league. Then at left back, Gabby George, she stepped up massively as well, returned from a very long ACL injury, which there would have been some concern about where her level would be at, but she came in and it was a seamless fit. She was such a good defensive option at left back in that side, and what it often allowed them to do was George to be a little bit deeper and Riviere then allowed to have a bit more of an attacking licence, and this got more out of Jade Riviere's attacking side. So They formed a fantastic defence last season, but halfway through the campaign, Hayley Ladd left for Everton. She'd been slowly phased out anyway, and obviously we saw Hinata Miyazawa learning that new role. And this was a really strong backline for Manchester United last season. So you may have thought, well, how could it get better? Well, we saw Millie Turner pushed out of the side to the bench. Obviously now she's picked up an ACL, or well, a knee injury, but don't think it's ACL. So she will be back this season, but obviously that's horrible to see. But I think Dominic Janssen coming in at centre-back from the start of this campaign anyway showed what United wanted to do. Obviously Gabby George has missed the start of this season as well. What they did in that position was they brought in Anna Sandberg, who they signed last summer, and she's looked fantastic at the start of this season. I think George offers them a bit more of a defensive option and Sandberg's better going forwards, but Sandberg's defensive work in this first few matches has been really strong, and this back line has been excellent. Even when Riviere was out of the side and we saw Celine Bizet coming in to play right back, that didn't see them look too poor. So I think it shows how good the rest of the defensive setup is, that they've managed to seamlessly replace Riviere with Bizet, someone who's a lot more attacking and still look good defensively. The other important signing they made was the addition of Yulia Zigiotti-Olma. Fantastic addition to this Manchester United midfield, because not only has it allowed them to push Janssen back, it's also given them a midfielder who's very comfortable receiving the ball in these sorts of areas, but also very comfortable pushing up with the ball. And oftentimes this season, we've seen Zigiotti-Olma leading the charge forwards, and we've seen Miyazawa slotting into more of a single pivot role. And obviously Hinata Miyazawa's transformation from an attacking player to a defensive midfielder can't be understated as to how impressive that has been. She stepped up massively and made Manchester United a much better side. So as you can see from that transformation, this is probably, well, short of Riviere coming back from injury, this will be their strongest defence for this season. And when you consider the other teams in the league, with Arsenal having Williamson out and some areas of their defence a little bit suspect, definitely I think with the number of mistakes Van Domstar's made already this season, Tyler Joyce is a huge upgrade there. With Chelsea perhaps lacking a little bit of understanding of how to play their system at the moment, and City similarly with some young players who aren't adapted to the league, and then still some teething issues with the new setup, United have got the most solidity playing out from the back, and defensively they've looked phenomenal this campaign. So let's take a look at a clip from the recent game against Arsenal, because I think this shows a lot of the principles that United are looking to execute this season. So we start here with Arsenal winning the second ball, and immediately we can see that Caitlin Ford is looking to drive this ball, carry this ball forward, and this is the only time really in the game where Arsenal find some space between the two United lines, this back four and then what is midfield 4 or 5, because the way that United are looking to defend is with a back four, often then with Miyazawa shielding between the two, and then with a midfield 4 setting in front of Miyazawa, and then Turland as a striker. It allows us to be quite aggressive in the press, but also recover back quite quickly. But in this clip, we can see that obviously United get dragged out, and they look to play this ball out to the right-hand side. But what United have done so well here is hold this back four, because what this allows them to do is stay really narrow, and a lot of this is helped out by Olivia Smith, because Smith is really narrow here, and this is a problem with Arsenal's setup as well. But what it does is United being narrow allows them to defend Arsenal really effectively in this space. Then as this ball gets played out to the right-hand side, Ford carries it, knocks it out to the right wing. This is some brilliant 1v1 defending by Sandberg. She stands up Smith really nicely here, forces her backwards, and then hounds her. She chases her, and she knows that she can then leave the responsibility onto Rolfo and Toon to go and try and deal with this mess. Now, they don't quite win the ball back, and it falls into the possession of Fox. You could probably argue there's a foul in there, but alas, Fox picks up the ball, and Arsenal have a chance now to try and find a breakthrough. But as we can see, they just can't do it. They're trying to force the ball through the lines, but United are so disciplined. They trap the runners really effectively. We could see there, that was a really interesting movement from Fox looking to go down the line, but Rolfo and Sandberg communicate, and as Rolfo lets her go down the line, she communicates to Sandberg, and then Sandberg tracks that run, and everyone is able to keep their positions well. And then Arsenal try and go to the left-hand side. McCabe on the ball, doesn't work, they're forced backwards. United now are pressing higher at the pitch. They try a long ball forwards to open up some space. United's defence shuffle across. This is really good from Sandberg again, and Emily Fox, frustrated, just puts an aimless ball across the box, and that's cleared away. And we can see there Arsenal trying to force it down the line, which is where they can be very dangerous against sides, but United understanding that threat and being able to thwart it with relative ease. So now let's take a look at Manchester United's structure, and again I'm going to use the example of the Arsenal game to demonstrate how they're setting up this season, both with and without the ball, but mainly we're looking at their out of possession shape. So it starts with this 4-2-3-1. We're often looking to build up. Oftentimes they will see Miyazawa drop in a little bit deeper. They'll split the two centre backs, as is a custom nowadays, and then it'll be more of a midfield three. Sometimes they will see Ziggy Otioma drop in and they'll form a two, and this flexibility gives them a lot of options. And oftentimes we see flexibility in possession. What we don't often see is a lot of flexibility out of possession, because United have a few different ways of dealing with Arsenal. So what we saw is when United were looking to press, we'd see Melvin Mallard obviously press up on the goalkeeper, push onto the two centre-backs. And what they did is they'd have Ella Toon alongside, Miyazawa operating as a bit of a pivot player in here, and Ziggy Otioma would go up to support the press. And obviously they go winger to full-back, and they press in this sort of shape, with then the defence pushing up onto halfway, of course. So what this allowed them to do was they could very easily put a lot of pressure on these two defensive midfielders for Arsenal, and Arsenal had a lot of problems building out anyway, with Caldente and Little probably not the best profiles for those roles. But oftentimes what we would see is that Ziggy Otioma would push up and put pressure on Little or Toon onto Caldente, and they could go player for player in this midfield shape. And because there's not really enough mobility or flexibility in this Arsenal midfield, United were able to make it really difficult for them to play out at times. Even when United would drop off and allow them a little bit more space in here, they would still struggle to play out. And so what we saw from United was some fantastic pressing. It's what we saw all of last season. I remember back to the Manchester City game where they were able to press them so aggressively and turn over the ball. And they have still got options like that. So sometimes they were going Mallard onto one striker, Toon was pressing up, and they'd form more of a midfield two, where because Mallard and Toon are here, they're going to block these passes into Caldente and into Kim Little very effectively, and then obviously these midfielders could push up and intercept if needed. Now, occasionally this can leave United's midfield a little bit open, this sort of shape, especially if both these players are pushed up. Then you can see how Russo and Blackstenius could work a little bit of space together. But because Tissier is able to be so aggressive, which we saw countless times where she would step up and get involved, or we would see Dominic Janssen at times would step up. Janssen tend to drop off more because Blackstenius was leaning this way. She wanted to attack into this sort of space. What we saw a lot of times was Janssen tracking this run and just seeing it wide, or being able to intercept it before then. What we saw with Tissier was she would step up, get involved and win the ball back quite early. So that really limited Arsenal coming forwards. When Arsenal did come forwards though, we'll move United back into their defensive shape, because what they did really effectively was they were very narrow. So if the ball's on the right hand side, obviously everyone then shuffles across the right hand side, and they'd keep it. They don't want too much distance between these defenders. They want to be able to maintain their line well, and they don't want to be able to allow passes through the line. So this is really good for Manchester United, keeping it narrow. Now what they would do is often Arsenal were trying to come down the right hand side, so they play it out to the left hand side, where you'd see someone like Caldente, Ford maybe drifting inside, McCabe overlapping. And then what they'd look to do is find Russo and Blackstenius, but that wasn't really an option. So instead, they'd often have Smith, who's playing in this sort of role, and then Fox supporting. And this is where you can start to see some of Arsenal's problems emerging, where they're not really able to break teams down despite all of these players. And so what United were doing very well was Sandberg would follow Smith wherever she went, really. So Smith went wide, you'd see Sandberg there, but Rolfo was key. And a lot of people doubted Rolfo's involvement in the game on Sunday, but the way that she was able to track the run of Fox, there was a few times where Fox would make this inside run, and you think, oh, that's going to be a problem, but Rolfo would be there to deal with it, and it was really disciplined. Obviously then Miyazawa and Ziggy Otioma in this midfield. What United were often doing was having Miyazawa a little bit deeper, and then having Toon and Olma in these sorts of positions. Once the ball had gone past this defensive line though, once United had played out, we'd see Ziggy Otioma drop a little bit deeper, Toon, and then obviously would join in the press with Mallard, and then obviously Park in these sorts of areas. But what United did very well was track each Arsenal player, man for man, player for player, and they were able to offer a lot of fantastic defensive work in this game. They were able to limit Arsenal coming forwards. It's why Arsenal really struggled to create chances, only had a handful of shots on target, and it was a really easy day for Fallon Tullis-Joyce. And then when United returned the ball over, what they'd look to do is find Mallard in behind, use her pace, then obviously with Park supporting, roll forward, bust a gut to try and get forwards, and Toon supporting as well. They were able to catch out Arsenal, especially in the early stages. If Arsenal had committed more, United's game plan may have worked very well, because they'd have invited Arsenal onto them, and if they were still able to withstand that pressure, they would then be able to transition. The problem came for United because Arsenal never committed. Arsenal just wanted the draw as well. So it's a very interesting game of football. I think what we saw was that United are very good at setting up against sides who want to have a lot of possession, but they're also, as we saw in the first 2 games of the season, able to set up really well against sides who are going to be a little bit more defensive. So a lot of flexibility from United this season. So I think the question remains then, how far can Skinner take Manchester United? Because he's taken them already from a side recently promoted from the Championship up into one that's competing for the WSL, but without a WSL title to their name yet, without a major European honour, just the 2 FA Cups so far. How far can Skinner realistically take this United side? Well, I want to break down just this season in terms of how far I think they could go, and I will start with the question of, are they good enough to win silverware this season? Now, I would say undoubtedly United are good enough to win silverware. The question remains whether they will or not, because they've now got the Champions League, which is going to be an added distraction. I think that'll add another layer of challenge to a very thin United squad. We've already seen a number of injuries already this season. If they continue to pile up with them having quite a light squad, I think they'll struggle similar to how Man City did last season. So regardless of Skinner's setup, if they don't have the players to make it work, I think they will struggle to win silverware. But if they continue playing the way they are, if they perhaps had another couple players in January, and if they can keep the majority and the core of the squad fit, I think they'll be okay, and I think they could definitely win silverware this season. Is this team good enough to win the WSL? Probably not at this stage. Tactically, definitely. I just don't know. Well, tactically in terms of they're able to beat the smaller sides and they're able to compete with the big teams in the league. But I think in terms of squad depth, United still don't have a squad deep enough to win the WSL or having a quality depth in that team. When we saw the opening game this season, they named 5 substitutes. You looked at the bench in the Arsenal game, there wasn't really much inspiring on there apart from Elizabeth Turland. So, you know, I think there is still a big problem there for United around quality in depth. The other problem for them is the question, can they actually beat these top teams? Because they earned themselves a really good draw against Arsenal, but can they beat these teams? Now, it's not necessarily necessary that they have to beat these teams, because if they draw against all of the big 3 sides across those 6 matches they're going to play, and those teams take points off each other, United could very much win this league. And obviously United are consistent then against other teams in the league. But the problem's going to come that if they can't beat these top sides, or say Chelsea for example, or Arsenal, then those sides go on and win all the rest of their games, that becomes a problem. And so how are they going to get over that hill? That remains a question for me around Skinner and Manchester United. So they're probably a few players off winning the WSL, having that squad depth to be able to be as consistent as they have been to start this season. And Skinner probably needs to know how to beat those big teams, because they're still a little bit playing underdog football, and sometimes they just need to go for it a little bit more. I think in that Arsenal game, if they did just commit, which they couldn't really do because they didn't have the subs to change the game, but if they did just commit, maybe they'd have won that match. But they set up really well, they earned themselves a point. It was a fantastic performance, and Arsenal were very unimpressive on that day. The other question for me is, how far off the UWSL are they? Obviously, this season is their first year competing in the competition, and that's a huge milestone in of itself. In terms of being able to win the competition, well, we saw Arsenal win it last season after only 8 months of René Slager's reign. And I think if you look at how Arsenal played in that Champions League run, if United play that same way, which is how they play at the moment, then maybe they could do the same. It would rely on the same sort of, they'd have to get a moment, and the team they're playing would have to have a bit of an off day, and they'd have to be absolutely perfect in their defensive setup. But I do think the way they're playing defensively does lay its hand more towards tournament football. It's about getting a result. Like, I think United could very much hold a team at 0-0, and then if someone like Ella Toone can step up, if you think back to that Champions League final for Arsenal, it was a moment where someone stepped up, found the goal, Mee played the pass through, and Blackstone has finished it off. Now, if United could have a moment like that, they can win knockout ties. So I think the Champions League isn't a million miles away. I still think there are a few quality players off, though, being able to win the Champions League. But when you look at their squad, they're very much assembling a world-class team. So I think United are in a really good position. Marc Skinner's in a fantastic position. He's probably the safest manager in the WSL right now. I think the job he's done over the last few years with such limited resources compared to the sides of the likes of City, Arsenal and Chelsea, who've been regularly spending upwards of 6 figures, sorry. upwards of £1 million in certain cases, who've been spending a significantly larger amount of wage budget. I think Skinner's done a very good job, and United are in a really strong position. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go this season. But that is everything for this video. I hope you have enjoyed. If you have, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. And if you want to watch more, another video on screen now for you to go and check out. So give that a click, give that a watch, and enjoy. That is everything though. Thank you guys very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.